Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world. Welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report, your one-stop source for all the latest news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program. Now, here's your host, Michael Butler.
Hello, and welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report. Today is Monday, November 20th, 2023. We're covering all the news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program across the country. We thank our friends at Fluor for being presenting sponsor for today's episode. In 2015, the United States welcomed its 409th National Park. It's called the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. It's designed to tell the story of America's super secret and successful effort to build the world's first atomic bomb that led to the end of World War II. The park encompasses 3 sites across the country, all of which played a key role in building the bomb. The sites are Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Hanford, Washington. Here's a local TV report that captured the opening of the park at Los Alamos in 2015.
In the early 1940s, Roger Rasmussen embarked on a mysterious mission. He didn't know where he was going and ended up in Los Alamos.
Nobody told us exactly what we were working on, but it didn't take long to figure it out.
Roger and other service members and scientists realized they were working on the world's first nuclear bombs that would eventually be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending World War II. Now, 70 years later, Roger's back for the formal opening of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. It includes 3 sites: Hanford, Washington, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Los Alamos. It's designed to help people understand how it felt to live in America in those days.
That was a very serious time, and it was a matter of survival, really.
At each site, you can walk through the historic spots, take tours, and hear the Japanese perspective. Rasmussen says there weren't very many people that were happy with him or the other people that worked on the Manhattan Project just years after those bombs were dropped, but he did say that knowing what he did for this country made it all worth it.
That didn't matter. You know, you do what you have to do, and whatever is in your lifespan, you do that. It's just life.
In Los Alamos, Lita Alicani, KOAT Action 7 News.
In today's episode, we'll be talking to Wendy Behrman. Wendy works for the National Park Service and serves as superintendent of the Manhattan Project National Park. Wendy told us that one of the purposes of the park is to promote reflection and remembrance of the events that led to the need for the Manhattan Project and the role it played in world history.
We feel a critical part of the history and the stories is reflection and understanding the difficult parts of the story and the history. Our park offers several opportunities, both in person and virtually, for reflection on the choices and consequences of the Manhattan Project. Each August, the park hosts reflection and remembrance events to mark the atomic bombings of Japan and to recognize the historical events and the trauma associated with those events. Last month, we held commemoration events for the 78th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Japan. And those events have a similar thread across our sites. You know, those events, we use that as an opportunity to engage with the public and solicit messages of peace or messages of reflection from the public.
We'll be back with more right after this from Fluor. As noted, the Manhattan Project National Park focuses on 3 sites across the U.S. Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Los Alamos in New Mexico, and Hanford in Washington State. One piece of history featured at Oak Ridge is the graphite reactor. It operated from 1943 to 1963 and had a pioneering role in atomic energy. It was the first reactor to produce electricity and enabled some of the earliest research on the hazards of radioactivity. For years after the war, it was the world's foremost source of radioisotopes for medicine, agriculture, industry, and other purposes. An invitation to one of Robert Oppenheimer's dinner parties was one of the most coveted social invitations in wartime within the tight-knit Los Alamos community. Today, you can see that home as part of the Manhattan Project National Park. And at Hanford, a highlight is B reactor, the world's first full-scale plutonium production reactor and a National Historic Landmark. In a January episode of this podcast, Jim Dunn, Historic Preservation Manager for UCOR in Oak Ridge, talked to us about what it means to have the Manhattan Project story captured in one of America's national parks.
You know, Mike, national parks are typically designated to natural areas with unparalleled natural beauty, to historic sites that have unparalleled events that occurred there. To designate the Manhattan Project as a national historical park really raises the awareness and exhibits the importance of what happened as the role that the Manhattan Project played in the history of our nation. It helped to bring World War II to an end. It opened the nuclear age. It spawned new technology that we're benefiting from today. And so the fact that it's been made a national park really emphasizes the important role of the Manhattan Project, not only during World War II, but even in our lives today.
We'll have more right after this from Floor. Wendy Behrman is a veteran National Park Service manager. She's been on the job as superintendent of the Manhattan Project National Park for about a year now. We caught up with Wendy at her office in Denver to learn more about what she's doing in creating awareness and guiding the park's future. We're talking with Wendy Behrman. Wendy is the superintendent of the Manhattan Project National Park. And Wendy, we're glad to have you here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for letting me join. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we're just happy to have you. We've got a lot of interesting things to talk about related to the national park. I'd like to start, though, with a little bit about you so our viewers and listeners can understand a little bit more about the superintendent of the Manhattan Project National Park. I understand you've been with the National Park Service for a while now and have held various assignments. So tell us a little bit about your background and what's led you to this position as the superintendent.
Well, yeah, I certainly have been with the Park Service a long time. I think I am coming up on 32 years, so almost my entire working career. I have been fortunate across those 32 years to work in a number of our program areas in the Park Service and across all of our levels, from our Washington office to our regional offices to parks. Before coming into this position, my most recent position, I had spent 11 years in our Washington office with the park planning and special studies, and serving as a program planner focused really on visitor use and visitor experience planning for our national parks. and in that capacity worked across a host of parks that are, managing visitor use and visitor experience, including Zion and Rocky Mountain and Black Canyon of the Gunnison. So a great set of experiences. I have also worked across a number of different National Park Service programs, ranging from time in our facilities program, in construction management, and in our commercial services program, which is the program that manages all the businesses that operate in our parks and provide, food and beverage and lodging and retail across our national parks. Going way back, I've earned a master's degree in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia and a bachelor's degree in architecture with an emphasis on historic preservation from the rival school in Virginia, Virginia Tech.
So you assumed this position last December. So you've been in it just about a year, and you're based in Denver. Is that correct?
That is correct. And one of the unique things about this park, traditionally the park superintendent is on the ground and on the site, because Manhattan Project National Historical Park has 3 sites. And so that is Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Hanford, Washington. As the park was being established, the decision was to place the superintendent physically and organizationally within our Intermountain region of the National Park Service. So the headquarters for the Intermountain region is located in Denver. The thinking, I believe, is that it's an easy flight to each of the sites. So I routinely am on the road and traveling to each of our sites to ensure that I connect with my site managers that I have at each of the sites and my staff that support the operations there.
Well, I know that people who've been involved in the Department of Energy programs for a long time and in the nuclear industry, nuclear defense side of the house, we're very excited about the announcement that there was going to be a Manhattan Project National Park. And I guess that occurred several years ago. But as the park has come into existence, people have become more and more aware of it and more interested. I'd like to just take a step back, if we can, and talk about why the park was created. First of all, tell us exactly when it was created, but why did the federal government decide that there was a need for a park to commemorate the Manhattan Project?
Well, the push to establish the park came from the communities that once housed the Manhattan Project's primary centers of operation, those being what I had just referenced: Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee. As it is with most new parks, right, there was years of effort and advocacy by state and local governments, by civic organizations, nonprofits, congressional representatives, and the communities themselves. In 2015, Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act, and which directed the establishment of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. On November 10th of 2015, the park was formally established when the U.S. Secretary of the Interior and the U.S. Secretary of Energy signed a memorandum of agreement that satisfied the legal requirements to establish the park. That agreement guides how the National Park Service and the Department of Energy will work together to preserve and interpret the historic sites, stories, and legacies associated with the secret race to develop the atomic bombs during World War II. Today, the park works closely with each of our sites, communities, and partners to provide interpretation opportunities and a variety of visitor experiences at each of those sites.
Well, let's take a minute to state the obvious, maybe to a lot of people who are viewers and listeners of this podcast, but I think it's worth saying. We do have the three sites: Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and Hanford. Can you just take us through why these three sites were selected for the park?
So when, a little bit of behind the scenes of the National Park Service, and, as communities and advocates propose different park units, there is a series of criteria that the Park Service evaluates to determine if a park unit is merited in that situation. The special resource study is the tool that the National Park Service uses to do that evaluation. And we evaluate a series of 4 key criteria. And that looks at national significance. It looks at the feasibility of having that as a Park Service unit. It looks at, are there better ways to manage that history and that property, through either other partnerships or agencies. So those are key criteria that the National Park Service looks at. As the special resource study was being developed for the Manhattan Project, the focus was around the 3 core communities where the Manhattan Project history was really focused. There are, of course, a number of other sites across the U.S. and internationally that played a role in the Manhattan Project history. But in order to keep sort of the sideboards on the park, right, the focus was, and the determination was, to really have the park be focused on those 3 community sites.
Is this the only national park, or are there others where there are such geographically diverse locations that make up the park? Is this the only one?
No, short answer. I think where we are unique is that we are one of the few parks that have sites across multiple National Park Service regions and are so spread out, right? We are on both coasts and then in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And I think from a operational and management perspective, that elevates and sort of provides opportunities to sort of navigate those, how we make sure that we are one park. And we sort of have a byline for the park that we've been sort of amplifying, which is one park, 3 sites, countless stories. And so, there is certainly some challenges that come with sites that are so far, geographically spaced. There are other park units that certainly have multiple sites, but again, they are often more located, often closer than ours are.
Well, let's talk for a minute about what a visitor can expect to see when they visit the Manhattan Project National Park. You've got 3 sites, so somebody might show up in Tennessee first, or they might be in Washington State, depending on where they're located in the country and what their interests are. But let's take each of these sites, Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and Hanford, and talk about what's there as part of the park that a visitor can see. I know, let's start with Oak Ridge. I know there, for example, the focus is on the former K25 Oak Ridge Gaseous Diffusion Plant site, and there's a lot of things being done there. So can you just tell us about what a visitor can expect to see at each one of these locations?
Of course. I think I'll start by reiterating our park is not, traditional park where you drive through an entrance gate. Instead, our park and our park sites are really integrated into each of the 3 communities where visitors have a variety of experiences and opportunities that they can take advantage of. Our park works with our community partners and organizations to, coordinate the opportunities and experiences and really work towards providing that diversity of opportunities. So, starting at Oak Ridge, we suggest that one of the first stops should be at the Park Visitor Center, which is co-located at the Children's Museum of Oak Ridge. The title of that museum is probably not reflective of the extensive content and history that museum presents, and is certainly another great opportunity as you visit our visitor center within that museum. And there at our visitor centers, our visitors can talk with the ranger or one of our many volunteers to get some park history. They can watch videos about the history of the project and pick up maps and directions to many of the sites that are around the community. Moving on, our Los Alamos site also has a visitor center, and that visitor center is located near Ashley Pond, which was the center of the Manhattan Project in the 1940s. Within, walking distance, a short walking distance from a visitor center, there are many community museums in Los Alamos that provide extensive collection of interpretive programming, exhibits, and films. I want to take the opportunity to sort of highlight our park app. It's actually the National Park Service app, but it is a mobile app that you can download from your favorite app site. And if you just search on MPS app, and we have focused a lot of our time and energy over these past few years on building that out. And what that does is it gives visitors in their hand, right, on their phone, an opportunity to learn about the park either when you're there on the ground or as part of your pre-planning for your site visit. Visitors can take self-guided walks in the community. Off of that app, we have several for each site, self-guided walks, and it's literally trying to, follow that map on your phone, and we then provide interpretive content when you get to each of those sites. In Los Alamos, we also partner with the Department of Energy, and they provide behind the fence tours twice a year that provide public access to park sites that are located on the active Los Alamos National Laboratory. Lastly, at Hanford, we don't have a visitor center, but DOE does have a visitor center that's open year-round. Our park rangers at Hanford offer free public programs spring through the fall. You can visit many of the historic community places within the Tri-Cities area. You can join our park rangers for park events such as Ride with a Ranger or Hike with a Ranger. And we use those types of outings to connect to different parts of the Manhattan Project story. And then, also at Hanford, the Department of Energy offers B-reactor and pre-Manhattan Project historic site tours daily from April to October. And I think, we continue to sort of advocate, use of both our MPS app and our website. We understand that there are challenges because we are so far apart, each of our sites, that it's not a typical visitor experience to do all three sites in one trip. But our website and our app offer that opportunity for visitors to start to immerse into each site, even if they're not there on the ground.
Well, that's a very good description, and thank you for that. One of the things, the communities and the towns and cities where the park is represented or located, on a community basis, they've done things to memorialize the things that the Manhattan Project did and the impact that it had on the world in terms of introducing the atomic bomb and helping to end World War II. What is the park doing in terms of reflection and commemoration having to do with the way the atomic age was born during World War II?
we feel a critical part of the history and the stories is reflection and understanding the difficult parts of the story and the history. Our park offers several opportunities, both in person and virtually, for reflection on the choices and consequences of the Manhattan Project. Each August, the park hosts reflection and remembrance events to mark the atomic bombings of Japan and to recognize the historical events and the trauma associated with those events. Last month, we held commemoration events for the 78th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Japan. And those events have a similar thread across our sites. You know, those events, we use that as an opportunity to engage with the public and solicit messages of peace or messages of reflection from the public. So we provide many different opportunities for visitors to submit them either in person or through off of our website. We have a virtual sort of link where people can submit their messages. We transfer, or those messages are submitted on luminaria bags, and at each of the 3 sites from August 6th through 9th, we do different events. So the events start at Oak Ridge, Tennessee on August 6th. And this year, like in past years, the park site hosted a sunrise ceremony to commemorate the anniversary. The event took place at the International Friendship Bell in Bissell Park in Oak Ridge. And we had music from the Oak Ridge Civic Music Association. And all of these ceremonies allow for quiet reflection, and the public's was invited at Oak Ridge to ring the bell, and ring the bell really for any reason that resonated with them, but certainly in hopes around the peace and reflection messaging. We then continued those events on August 8th. We were intending to host a similar event at Ashley Pond in Los Alamos. We collected a number of messages from visitors and had the luminaria bags, and again, offering that opportunity for visitors just to connect and use the time to walk around the pond and read the messages. Weather was not our friend that evening, so we had to cancel that event. And then we finished the event on August 9th at Hanford, doing yet another similar sort of reflection ceremony with luminarias and music. And last year, we actually reached out and engaged with Pearl Harbor. And so last year, Pearl Harbor also joined our commemorative events. And so this year on August 7th, Pearl Harbor did similar. They solicited messages of peace and had luminarias around the harbor. So those are events that are very meaningful, not only to our park staff and to the history, but certainly the feedback we receive from visitors it's a great opportunity to sort of pause and reflect on that part of the history.
Well, that seems like a very important part of the park's mission. What kind of public response is the park getting in terms of visitors? How many visitors do you have, and how does the Manhattan Project National Park compare to some of the others?
I will say, I will caveat my response by saying, in the grand scheme of things, Manhattan Project National Historical Park is still a very new park, right? We are 8 years young and are just sort of, entering our infancy stage. And so when you ask the question of how we compare to other parks, I mean, it's never a fair comparison because of our type of park and where we are in sort of the development of our park. Having said that, upwards of 400,000 people have visited in person since the park was established in 2015. We know people are very curious. Some want to learn about what their relatives who worked on the project experienced, or they want to tell stories about family members that played a role in the Manhattan Project. Others want to know more about the history and its legacies. It's a complex history that visitors approach from many angles. The dominant narrative around the Manhattan Project has focused on the scientific achievements. Fission was discovered in 1938, and by 1945, the United States developed 2 fully functional atomic weapons. The leaps in human understanding during this period was profound. And while this is predominantly a science story, it's also a story about people. And that's where our role as the National Park Service is really critical and is sort of our key focus in helping sort of tell the complete stories and the complete history. We also strive, to share these stories through the authentic voices from the perspectives of those who lived the history and their descendants. And I say that because, part of the history is around the Native American tribes that were displaced as these secret cities were set up, and sort of the impacts to their homelands. And so one of the initiatives we are going to emphasize going forward is providing space for them to tell their stories and their histories around the Manhattan Project.
We had a little movie over the summer called Oppenheimer, which a lot of people paid attention to at the box office. And I'm wondering what a film like that, what the impact would be on awareness or interest or of the Manhattan Project Park. Did you see any spike? Could you tell any difference after the movie came out?
Certainly, right. And I think the success of that is how many people have not only heard about Oppenheimer now, but are reaching out to our park or visiting our park to better understand the history. Park visitation is a science, and tracking that visitation is even a more complex science. And as I said, right, in the grand scheme of National Park Service units, we are relatively new, 8 years young. We have continued to try to figure out how best to track our visitation, but what we recognized early on is not only the on the ground visitation, but our virtual sort of visitation, and sort of the role that both of those visitors play and the opportunities that affords us. We have really focused a lot of our time as the park has been stood up on developing content both on our park website, but also across all of our social media platforms, right? And I say all of that because I will give you some stats around sort of visitation, right? I sort of alluded earlier that since the park stood up, we've had about 400,000 people visit the park. But let's look at Los Alamos specifically, because I think that's where we probably have seen the most spike. And that's obviously as a result of the Oppenheimer movie because of its location. The in-person visitation for our Los Alamos site in 2022 is about 1,100. This year in July, just a year later, it's over double. We saw about 3,000 visitors. And we are seeing that sort of doubling of on-the-ground visitation across all 3 sites. I think more importantly for us is the amount of engagement and interest in our social media world. We have seen the number of views and users across our platforms increase exponentially. We have about 7,000 followers across our platforms. And for the first time ever, we had 2 viral posts in July. One was about the location of the Trinity site, and that had a reach of 7 million people. So a phenomenal opportunity, right, for us to reach other audiences that have not yet connected to the history. On our park website, we have also seen incremental, an increase in access to our website. In the month of July alone, we had a total of almost 120,000 page views of our website. And we're certainly seeing a lot of reposts of our content in the media, both in written and sort of television media and coverage. So that's all a great indicator for us, right? I mean, that there is interest, and certainly we will continue to sort of advance and increase our on-the-ground opportunities, but we will also continue to sort of build out the content across our website and social media platforms, because we see that we're reaching other audiences that may not have the opportunity to visit in person.
Well, it certainly looks like through your own efforts, your own promotional efforts, and the help of things like the Oppenheimer movie, that a lot more people are becoming aware of the Manhattan Project National Park, and it's pretty. You can be pretty assured that your number of visitors is going to increase over the years. One of the things, we're getting close to the end of our discussion here, but one of the things that I'd like to do is circle back to public involvement between the park and the citizens of the country, how the public can become involved, what means there are for that. You mentioned the Junior Rangers earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program and kind of recap other programs that are maybe available for the public to be involved with the park?
Certainly. All three of the park sites have site-specific Junior Ranger booklets available free to the public when you're visiting. If you're not familiar, the core of the Junior Ranger program is a booklet of activities and exercises that help educate about the Manhattan Project story. Once you complete the booklet, you're eligible to be sworn in as a Junior Ranger and get your Ranger badge. A little known secret, there's no age limit. So we certainly have, kids and their grandparents engage in the program. A couple of weeks ago when I was in Los Alamos, we had the opportunity to swear in 2 grandparents and their granddaughter. And you're probably familiar. The dedicated Junior Rangers have vests where they pin on all of their Junior Ranger programs. And the parents, or the grandparents and the granddaughter, they each probably had well over 80 Junior Ranger badges, not only from the National Park Service, but from some of our sister agencies. So the Junior Ranger program is a great way for us to connect to that next generation and inspire and get them excited about the history. One sort of milestone for us is we just redesigned our Junior Ranger badges. So if you've already gotten our old style, maybe this inspires you to come back again and do the program again. Our new badges have gone old school, so they are now wooden, and they now include the atom graphic as sort of our Junior Ranger icon.
Well, Wendy Behrman, Superintendent of the Manhattan Project National Park, with your terrific byline, 1 park, 3 sites, countless stories. We're just really happy to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for sharing the story of the park with us. And I'm sure there are a lot of our listeners and viewers who will be anxious to take a visit to one of the 3 sites, or maybe all 3 of them, over the coming months. Well, thanks again for being with us today.
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world.